He was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he, Jesus, was saying to him, the man, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And the man begged Jesus earnestly not to send them out of the country. And now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, send us out to the pigs, let us enter them. So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirit came out and entered the pigs, and the herd numbered about 2,000, and they rushed down the sea bank into the sea and drowned into the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And when they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is the word of the Lord. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, the one who calmed the sea, and cast out these demons. You are now present here in your spirit. And we are here with our needs, with our cries, with our pains, and with our fears. Jesus, I look to you as the only hope that we have in a world of chaos, in a fallen world that's broken. And you're the only hope we have when we see the fallenness of ourselves and how far we have gone and how far we could go, descending into destruction and death. We are filled with anxiety, whether we admit it or not, Jesus. And perhaps your plan this morning is to meet us through your word. Would you do that? I ask in your name. Amen. So this week is the week of peace for Advent. We're a week behind if you know the traditional week. That's all right. Peace is one of those words that can have multiple definitions, multiple ways of understanding it. But we know this, however we define it, peace is one of the deepest longings of all of our hearts. There have been countless voices crying out throughout human history for peace, longing for stillness, for calm. And the story of Scripture and the story of history is that many people have found complete supernatural peace by encountering Jesus. At the end of John's gospel, as Jesus is getting ready to be arrested that night, he looks to his disciples and he's comforting them. And we almost read this for pastoral prayer. And one of the things that he says to them is he says, "In this world you will have trouble." One of the things he also says there, right in that same speech, is he says, "Peace I give to you, peace I leave with you, not as the world gives do I give." What is the peace that's found in Jesus? What is the peace that Jesus offers here? In these two stories in the Gospel of Mark, we see two instances of chaos and two stories where there are people who are in desperate need of peace. We get pictures, if you will. These are real things that happen to real people. That's actually the way that Mark puts his story forward. He's saying, I'm not putting forward a myth. I'm not putting forward a parable for your life. I'm putting forward real historic events of how these people encountered Jesus. That's significant. That's important for us. You know, and we can read these stories, and I'm sure you've heard these stories, like when Jesus calms the storm or when Jesus casts out these demons. And before I get to what I'm going to say, I want you to understand on the front end that Jesus really did these things. That's the claim of Scripture, and that's what we believe as God's people. These are real instances of Jesus, the Son of God, God in the flesh, entering into situations, drawing near to people in need, and bringing peace. But it is good and right for us to see that this is speaking a larger truth to us that meets us even in our situations. So these stories that really happened speak to us in our need today. And we're a people in need of peace. I'm sure you've encountered this before. I'm not really going to go into this, but it has been said that we are the most anxious generation ever. That we live in a time when anxiety is the highest it has ever been. And if you have anxiety as a broad category, and we talk about mental health all the time, and that's getting thrown around a lot. And I mean, I'm aware that some of y'all, you work in the medical profession, and you can see it. Some of you work in the school, and you can certainly see it. And some of you just live your own lives, and you can see it. We're anxious, and we seek to fill the anxiety in our souls, fill the gaps with distractions, with trivial things, with entertainments. And we find that never really quite fills the anxiety. Actually, in fact, many times, those practices lead to deeper anxiety. So here, as we near Christmas, I am proclaiming to you that peace, true peace, is found nowhere else but in Jesus, the Son of God, who has drawn near to us to meet us in our need and to give his very self. Here we see that Jesus draws near in deep chaos to give peace. You look at Mark 4:35 through 41. That's the ending of that last chapter where Jesus calms the storm. And we can see this. This storm is this external chaos. Chaos outside of us, just in the world, right? That can then threaten us and threaten our peace. This storm was real danger for these disciples, these followers of Jesus. Jesus had just gotten done preaching and teaching, and he had been in this boat, and there's like on one side of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is the lowest elevation freshwater body in the world. And it's kind of in this basin surrounded by these highlands and mountains. And it was known for having violent storms. Still to this day, violent storms that will come up out of nowhere. But this place also, the shore, and where Jesus was teaching and doing much of his ministry, there's a place there are places on the shore that provide kind of a natural amphitheater. So crowds have been flocking to Jesus. And Mark has been recording this over and over again. Actually, last week we were in Mark 2, where Jesus was so surrounded by crowds that those in need had to take drastic steps to get to Jesus. They actually had to peel the roof back to get their friend down in front of Jesus. So this is kind of the environment, the setting of the story as we arrive, that there are crowds flocking to Jesus. And so in essence here, Jesus has just gotten done preaching to the crowds. His disciples, some of them were fishermen. They made their lives on the Sea of Galilee. And so perhaps they have taken one of their family boats that they owned, and Jesus gets into that boat, and they push out from the shore, and Jesus faces the shore, and the crowds have gathered around, and the land slopes up so that when Jesus speaks, his words carry over the water, and the message of the good news can get to these people. And it says, as the day is ending and Jesus has been teaching and preaching and healing and helping all day, surrounded by people, Jesus says, okay, let's go across to the other side. The water is still, the sun is setting, these men are experienced. Yeah, that sounds like a good getaway, right? I mean, perhaps for these disciples, they have been in a whirlwind following Jesus, and now they're like, okay, we do this. I mean, they go out and fish at night all the time. And they know the peace that can be there. And so they think this is going to be an experience of peace. We're getting away, getting to ourselves, getting secluded out in nature. That might be what they expect. But we learn that on that evening when they go out across the sea, they leave the crowds. They take Jesus with them just as he was. He goes straight from teaching right to crossing the water. They don't even get out of the boat and get supplies. It says, and other boats were with him. I don't know what that's about other than the fact that this seems to be, just point to the fact that this is eyewitness testimony. Like, nothing is made of the other boats. Nothing is ever said more about them. That's not something you would just put in the story. We know that we're told by history that Mark gets much of his information from the eyewitness testimony of Peter, who is one of the disciples, one of the fishermen that followed Jesus. As they're going out across the sea, a great wind, a storm arises. Now, this is not unheard of, like I said, but this would have been unexpected, out of nowhere. There could have been no signs of this, and then all of a sudden, middle of the sea, the storm comes. It's a windstorm, there are waves, and it says the waves are breaking into the boat. The storm represents real and present danger. The wind is violent, the waves are overwhelming, the boat is filling with water. These men are experienced, but they're getting beyond their ability to manage the situation, right? The outside is threatening their control. They are actually beyond their ability to control the circumstances. The circumstances can't be controlled. The circumstances are overwhelming them, and they get to the point of thinking that they are going to die. Every ounce of effort these men have is to save themselves, and they are failing. I mean, life is full of experiences like this. There are things that we all face in life that are beyond us. And, at some point, there will be a circumstance, a health crisis, an accident, something that happens that will threaten our very lives. So I don't want to just make this story a parable, because here's what let me just say this at the front end here before we do any more. This story is about who Jesus is. It's about who Jesus is. Just look at the end. It says, they asked one another, who then is this? The story is about Jesus. But the crisis that they face here is not foreign to us. It is actually near to us. Every single one of us will face moments like this, where things around us are so far outside of our control, we can do nothing about them. Some of y'all have faced this before. You have. Things are falling apart around you. You don't know why it's happening. You didn't expect it to happen. The accident came out of nowhere. The loss came out of nowhere. The medical diagnosis came out of nowhere. The sin from another person came out of nowhere. And you are overwhelmed by the circumstances. This life is full of real threat to our peace. I don't have to convince you of that. Surely you know that. And if these men faced this situation and they found Jesus there near them, then I think one of the things we're meant to see is that for believers in Jesus, this can be true of us as well. That in the midst of the deepest storms of life, Jesus is there with us. Notice what they say. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? When we face the difficult circumstances of life that are overwhelming, even believers, especially believers, can wonder and can ask, God, do you care? Do you care? When fear overwhelms us because of the circumstances that really are fearful, we can begin to wonder, does God care about me? Now it's clear, they don't expect Jesus to do anything but probably help them get the water out of the boat. Give us a hand. We're dying here. What are you doing? Mark tells us that Jesus was asleep in the stern on a cushion. Jesus is sleeping, and these men are at their end of being able to save themselves. And it's understandable, right? You look at them, and we can scoff at it, but every single one of us can get here in life. And the evidence of Jesus sleeping might point to the fact that he does not care. Now, you can probably listen to 20 sermons on this text, and you can hear 20 slightly different interpretations of Jesus sleeping, okay? Here's my interpretation. Jesus was tired. Jesus was tired. Why was he sleeping? There might be more to it, but there's at least this. He's not pretending to sleep. Jesus is so exhausted at this moment in his ministry that he could sleep through this storm. He's not a veteran fisherman. Doesn't have a sea legs like the others, more likely not. But he is sleeping through a storm that is threatening their lives. I think at the very least, what we can see is Jesus is exhausted. Why is he exhausted? Because he has fully given himself to the mission of why he came, to preach the good news, and he's healing people, and there's needs that are overwhelming all around him, and he is a person, a man in the flesh. He can only be one place. Jesus is asleep because he's exhausted, and this detail matters. And it relates to their question, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And notice how they refer to him. Well, he's just been teaching. It'd be natural for them to refer to him in that way. They have a view of who Jesus is. And they're doubting, does Jesus care? Now, it's really more like, come on, man, wake up and help us out here. We're dying. They have this picture of who Jesus is, and they have this skewed view of who he is and what he's able to do in the moment. But him sleeping is evidence he doesn't care, apparently. Jesus awoke. He didn't wring his hands. He didn't say, oh no. He awoke and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. I mean, in these In these two verses, verses 38 and 39, we get this highly complex picture of Jesus. A man who is so weak and exhausted he can sleep through a storm, and yet when he wakes up, he has but to say a word, "Be quiet," and it all goes away. The way that Mark words this about what happens when Jesus speaks, it says, "The wind ceased, and there was a great calm." The picture here is this, is that when Jesus speaks, the wind immediately stops, and then it doesn't take the sea a bit to calm down, it completely stills. I mean, think about that. I mean, the miracle of just stopping the storm and then the waves die down eventually is one thing. But for Jesus to say the word and boom, there's peace, instant peace. I mean, I don't know of a better view of the incarnation than this. This is what we celebrate at Christmas, that this is incomprehensible and beyond us, but Jesus is God in the flesh, fully God and fully man. Jesus put on our flesh to experience our weakness to the point of utter exhaustion in a boat in a storm. And yet at the word, he can overcome all of the threat. We see this great truth. The question sets up the question that we all have in life when we're overwhelmed. God, do you care? And the picture of Jesus we get here is both a fully human and fully divine, entering into our weakness. The picture of Jesus on the cushion in the boat sleeping shows us that God cares. Jesus put on flesh, became one of us to experience our weakness, to know what it was like to go through life as a limited, finite human being. And there is mystery here. Certainly there's mystery here in these two verses, but we see this much as true. Mark is telling us this. We can see Jesus does care. He is both powerful enough to overcome the things that threaten our peace, and he is willing to enter in with us. Jesus turns to them and he says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" Now, I'm going to admit, that's a hard thing for me to read and wrestle with when Jesus looks at them and says that. Like, if I were writing the story, I would want Jesus to look at them and I would want him to say this, "Guys, you don't have to be afraid. I was right here with you." That's not what he says. He says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" But Jesus seems to expect that the miracles that they have witnessed and their time with Jesus leading up to this point should have given them enough information to know that Jesus was with them, that he cared, and that he could do something about it. So when we read them waking him up, I don't think they're expecting him to perform this miracle. I think they're completely surprised by what Jesus does. And Jesus says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they're left with this question lingering on their lips. Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey them? And they go from fear at the storm to a great fear facing Jesus, encountering the reality of who Jesus is, causes more fear and trembling than the storm that they almost died in. And their question is kind of left to linger as Mark continues his story. The storm reveals Jesus' power. It reveals his care for them. It reveals his willingness to be with them. And then this next thing happens. And I think we're meant to read this. Mark is trying to show us this, that the answer to the disciples' question of fear when they're faced with Jesus is answered in the next story. Who then is this? And it doesn't come on the lips of a disciple, it comes on the lips of this man with a demon. And here in this next story, we see this man with a demon. And this man has been so overcome internally. I don't fully understand this, okay? I don't have a neat explanation for how this can come about, why this would happen. I really don't. You can go and read good commentaries, and people who wrestle with that idea of how does demon possession work, and can we make sense of this. I'm not going to try to do that. I'm just going to take the story as it is, and Mark tells us this man has an unclean spirit. But notice, who then is this? And then you just jump down to verse 7. Jesus, Son of the Most High God. We're told who this is. We entered into this man's story, and Mark sets it up and gives us details about this guy's backstory, right? It says this man, immediately as Jesus steps out of the boat, we're going to, I guess in the flow of the story, you would assume that this is morning, the next day. They get across the sea. Jesus steps out of the boat, and immediately this man meets Jesus. There are tombs there. There's this graveyard, if you will. And this man comes directly out of the graveyard, which I think there's... we're meant to see that this man is at the brink of utter death and destruction. And then there's overtones of uncleanliness, and this man is so defiled at this point. And he's so isolated. And he comes right out of this death, defilement, isolation, this dissolving of himself, and Jesus is there. And he comes directly to Jesus. But Mark gives us a backstory first that I think we're meant to make parallels with the story before, right? This man can't be bound. No one can subdue him. He's beyond the ability of anyone around him, both to help him and to keep him from harming others. This man is so overcome with chaos and destruction. And we're told this is an unclean spirit. So there's spiritual beings at work inside of this man, however that works. He's so overcome, and no one can help him. And while this man is a fractured self, you can see that. The way the story unfolds too, I tried to point it out just as I was reading. But the way that Mark refers to the man kind of develops through the verses. That he's kind of presented as the singular man. The man comes and speaks to Jesus. He cries out with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me?" But as it develops, you see these demonic beings drawn forth by the presence of Jesus, to the point where you realize there are thousands of them oppressing this man. And this man's identity is like fluid in the story, where he's presented as himself, coming to Jesus, speaking to Jesus, but all the time you're kind of wondering, who is it that's actually speaking? We see here a picture. It's a real man, so I don't mean it's just simply a picture, but we see here a vivid portrait of what fallen humanity is when it goes to the furthest extremes. Guys, I don't have neat categories for demon possession and how that works and how that interfaces with mental health and all of that, but surely there's some connection here. This man is lost in the chaos of what's going on inside of him. We're not told why this happens, how it happens, if this man is culpable, if he did something to cause this. All we're told is that this man is in such a desperate state. It's hard to even see where the man begins and the demons and disorder begins. He's not whole. And so where the storm is more of like a picture, if you will, of all the chaos in the world around us, the circumstances that can overwhelm us, this man is the extreme picture of what really is present in every single one of us. I mean, the Bible says this, that all people are under the sway of the evil one. Paul talks in Ephesians 2, and he says that all of us, before Christ, were following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. The scriptures tell us that everyone who sins is a slave to sin. You go and you read Genesis 4. This is the fallout of the sin in the garden. And one of Adam and Eve's sons is getting ready to commit murder. He's getting ready to kill his brother, and God comes to him and he says, sin is like a beast crouching right outside of your door. It's like a beast waiting to have you as you exit your house, is the picture God has. It's this very scary picture. And I think we're meant to even see this overtone of like spiritual forces and demonic power, and God says, watch out. Sin is present in us. And there are spiritual forces at work against us. And this man just shows the farthest extreme of what it looks like when we are overcome and we lose ourselves. And every one of us knows what this is like in the throes of the sins that we've given ourselves over to. Maybe not to this extreme, surely not to this extreme, but every single one of us knows what it's like. You look and you say, why did I do that? What was I thinking? Maybe it was a moment of extreme anger and it seemed to come out of nowhere. That was chaos inside of you. You can blame your angry outburst on what someone else did to provoke it, but really, if you were honest, it came from inside of you. And it came in a way where you lost control. We talk like that, right? The same can be true of all kinds of sin that we experience and that we are responsible for. This man is the extreme, but he's not different than us. We all have the sway of spiritual powers at work in our lives, and we all have the brokenness that this man is experiencing. And this man is at the end of himself, right? He has no friends, nobody with him. He's all alone. He's isolated, and his life is in pieces. And really, the only form of protest he can have is to cry out and cut himself. And perhaps this is even a sign of the spiritual powers that are working against him. If we were given the right circumstances, we perhaps might not end up where this man is, but there is this possibility for every single one of us without Jesus. We can be so out of control, so overwhelmed, so overcome that we have no hope. And the chaos inside of us is far too big for us. And we're even losing ourselves. I mean, this is real. This happens. And much like the disciples, they speak out of fear and they say, "Teacher, do you not care?" I mean, I'm gonna read when he comes up to Jesus and he says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." That I'm not going to separate the man's voice from the demon's voice, but the man is here too. And this man he knows who Jesus is. He doesn't have this is supernatural knowledge of who Jesus is. This is the first person who talks about Jesus in this way in this gospel. And all along, building up to this chapter, everybody's wondering who Jesus is. They see this that Jesus does, and that Jesus does, and this thing that Jesus says, and everybody's like, who is this guy? This is the first guy who gets it, but he gets it because of these spiritual powers. James tells us that the demons believe in God and they tremble, but they don't have faith. And that's the state this man is in. This information that he has is supplied by these demons. Perhaps his voice is mingled with theirs or theirs with his. But this man sees Jesus and all he sees is a threat. In our sin, when we look to Jesus, that's really all we see is a threat. When we see Jesus for who he truly is, if we're left in our sin, all we will see is threat. Threat to my autonomy, threat to myself and what I want. And this man is faced with a power beyond him and Jesus, but all the power he's ever known has oppressed him. And where Jesus has come to save this man, he sees Jesus as another one come to torment me. But his voice is mingled with these spiritual powers, and they know Jesus has come to judge them. They know that they're no match for him. Even in a mighty number, it says, as Jesus converses, he is drawing out what's really going on. These demons can't hide themselves anymore. I mean, everyone thought this man had an unclean spirit, but we come to find as he encounters Jesus that it's multiple. It says, my name is Legion. This would be a number for upwards of 6,000 in a Roman legion. That would be a group of soldiers. We don't know exactly how many. I don't think Mark's trying to give us a precise number. But that name that these demons are using is meant to communicate a mass of power aligned to destroy. And the man here, look at this, in verse 10, he's begging Jesus, he's advocating for the spirits. We can be so in bondage to our own sin that even as it's killing us, we can hold on to it. And again, I'm not saying I don't know why this man has this that's happening to him. And I'm not saying it's because he has sinned, but I certainly can see myself at times when I look at the way that it seems, at least on face value, that he begs Jesus earnestly not to send them out of the country. That the man finds some kind of solace in what's destroying him. I don't know how that can be, and yet I know it's true. Because even like the minimal small little things that don't help me, like vegging out on my phone when I could be praying, I still give myself over to at times. The things that we think many times are going to give us the peace that we seek in the turmoil of ourselves are actually destroying us. And our only hope is Jesus to meet us. And then they advocate for themselves and they beg Jesus, send us to the pigs. And I'm not going to make sense of this. I don't know exactly what's going on here. But one thing that sticks out to me is that the sea that threatened the lives of the disciples, this chaotic external environment that was so threatening to them and almost killed them, is now wielded in the hands of Jesus as an instrument of judgment on these demons. I don't get that fully. What's going on with the pigs? Why do they have to die too? But Jesus sends these demons into the pigs, and there's this picture almost of evil self-destructing. But the man is saved. Evil self-destructs, but the man is saved, and it's all done by the power of Jesus meeting this man. And Jesus restores what was dismantled and broken and dissolving in this man. I love the picture that we get when the people hear about what has happened. They come to Jesus and they find the man sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Notice the parallel. As the storm is calmed, the disciples stand there looking at Jesus, seeing his power, and they are afraid. But there's a difference here too, where the disciples wondered and stay with Jesus, and they consider who he is, and they want to know. There's this curiosity. The crowds want nothing to do with Jesus. These people on this other side of the sea, they're not Jewish people. Jesus has gone into a Gentile region, a place that has been unreached. And these people utterly reject Jesus. They're afraid of whatever power he has, and they say, get away. We don't want anything to do with you. But the man wants to stay with Jesus. But Jesus has a bigger purpose for the man. He says, go home. One of the only places in the Gospels when Jesus heals a person and then says, go tell other people about it, is right here with this man. It's interesting. Go home. Tell your friends how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you. This man goes from dissolved self, demon-possessed, nobody can stop him, nobody can help him, to the one who is sent with the message of the good news of God on his lips about Jesus, to tell others who are far away from Jesus who Jesus is and what he's done. Both stories have the elements of fear and chaos. Both stories have the elements of who Jesus is in his power and might, how he draws near to save. The disciples were afraid and they wonder, who then is this? And they understand rightly from the Old Testament, it's why we read the psalm about the sailors on the sea, is because for a Jewish person, the ability to command the wind and waves and to have them obey is only the power that God can do. Only God can do that. And so they're left wondering, and they're not there yet. Who then is this that he can do this, if only God can do this? And I don't think they know the answer yet, but they stay with Jesus. The townspeople are also afraid, but they ask Jesus to leave. Their fear leads to distance, and they reject Jesus. But Jesus leaves a witness there in their midst. I love that. Even though they have rejected Jesus, this man becomes a witness of his mercy in their community. I think we're left to face the reality, we should be left to face with the realities of our own fears. Fears that come from without when the world seems to overwhelm us, circumstances we didn't expect that we find ourselves in, and our fear is threatened. And even perhaps we can sympathetically, even though this is a very abnormal story about this man, begin to understand that this same dynamic is happening inside of us with our own sin and our own fears. And there's stuff inside of us we can't fully understand. And we believe the Bible is true, that there are spiritual forces at work in the world preying on us. And here in the story, we're left with Jesus is the antidote to these fears. Jesus is the one who has come to give us peace in the fears without and the fears within. The striking thing about Mark's gospel is that this kind of way that the story ends in fear doesn't just stop here. Over and over again, as people encounter Jesus, there's this fear of wondering, who is Jesus? That's how the Gospel of Mark ends, in fact. After Jesus is resurrected and the women go to the tomb and they find it empty and it's proclaimed to them that Jesus has resurrected, they go back and tell the disciples, and the disciples are left in wonder and awe and fear. Now we know the story doesn't end there. Why we exist today as believers is because the story didn't end there. But Mark is wanting us to confront who Jesus is. And to find that the fear of him, the right fear of him, is the only place we can find true peace. Fear in the power of Jesus, but fear that leads us to draw near because we see that he has drawn near to us. Everything in the story is saying that. Jesus has drawn near. From him sleeping in the boat, to him stepping to the shore, to him leaning in conversation with the man, to him sending the man even. Jesus is drawing near. This is the promise of Advent and Christmas, that Christ has come. He has drawn near to us in our need. And he is offering his very self as our peace. You know that picture of Jesus in the boat, asleep. There's a striking parallel, and the commentaries, when you go and you read them, some agree on that, or some go here and others doubt that this is what we're meant to draw. But there are striking parallels between Jesus in the boat, asleep in the storm, and the story of Jonah in the Old Testament. And so just kind of tentatively, I want to end here with that picture, because when Jonah is running from what the Lord has called him to do, he thinks he can get away from God, but in fact, he can't escape God's presence or God's power. He's sleeping in the bottom of the boat as the sailors are trying to save themselves on the Mediterranean Sea. And ultimately, the only way that they can be saved is if Jonah is thrown into the sea, and he becomes a willing participant. And he says, throw me into the sea and the storm will stop. And they throw him into the sea and the storm stops. And they're left in great fear and wonder at this God that Jonah professes. Jesus, when he refers to his own death and resurrection, he talks about his resurrection like the sign of Jonah. So I don't know that it's stretching too far to say that when we read this story and we put together the biblical picture, we see that Jesus did come to be thrown into the sea, but the sea is not the sea that they were on in that moment. The sea is the sea of our sin and death. Every single one of us deserve death from our sin. We bring it on ourselves, in fact. And yet Jesus willingly came in our place to be the one, the substitute, who dies in our place. But like Jonah, he didn't stay in the sea of death. He was resurrected. He broke the jaws of sin and death so that his people can have life and peace in his name. So believers, we have a resource in Jesus that can overcome every one of life's fears, even the fear of death. We have Jesus. He's not just a resource, he's a person who is with us in our need and in our fear. And he's gone before us. He has come, and he will come again. So this Christmas we look to Jesus. We find that in the midst of life's chaos, outside of us and inside of us, Jesus is our only hope of peace. He is the Son of God who has come for us, drawn near to us to bring us peace where we have none. Would you believe in him this morning, either for the first time or anew? I'm going to ask Jim and Walker to come forward. We're going to sing our final song, and then Tim will close us in a benediction and a prayer. And if during this song or if after the service you would like to talk to one of us about Jesus and trusting in him, I want you to feel open and welcome to do so. And believer, if you need prayer for trusting Jesus in this moment of your life, you also, I want you to feel free to come and ask for prayer or turn to your neighbor and pray as we close in song and prayer. Let me pray for us. Jesus, we thank you that you are our peace, that you have come to give us life in your name. I pray that you would help us to trust you and to look to you when we are faced with fear in this life, and to see that ultimately this fear is met in the truth that you have drawn near to us. May we trust you and believe in you and find peace and life in your name, I pray. In your name, Jesus, amen.